Welcome, I'm Dave,
I'm John.
and this is Teaching Like Ted Lasso.
Our special guests for this episode are Andrew Otten and Dr. Samuel Otten.
For a show about sports, Ted Lasso has more dialogue than action, so we thought that an episode on the theme of discourse would be appropriate.
So one of the scenes that I think about when it comes to discourse involves the Diamond Dogs.
Oh, I love those, right? That's exactly when we were talking about discourse as a theme. That was what leapt to mind for me too.
The Teaching Like Ted Lasso Little People Theater present a scene adapted from Season 1, Episode 8. A warning that this scene contains material for a mature audience.
Don't you fret, my fine furry fella. In a matter of minutes, your relationship dilemma will be in the past. For I am rounding up the Diamond Dogs.
Who the fuck are the Diamond Dogs?
It's just a group of people who care, Roy. Not unlike folks at a hip-hop concert whose hands are not in the air.
Okay, so this is about you and Keely, right? Saw this coming.
Nothing like the early days of courtship.
Okay, this is my nightmare.
I think the idea of you and Keely is like cookies and cream. And I think we all agree two great tastes that go great together, right?
Perfect analogy. Yes, I am into her, but we all know who her ex-boyfriend is, and now I've got him stuck right in here.
I don't understand the problem.
I mean, Keely's just so kind. You know, to be liked by someone like her must be so wonderful.
Shout out to the Gershwin brothers right there. But dang it, fellas, you're still not getting it.
Thank you.
Sure, Roy here has slept with a bunch of different people in his past. But Keely's got her own romantic and sexual history that predates Roy. And that's not okay.
Oh, he means the opposite. I love it when Coach does sarcasm. I can't control my feelings.
Well, then by all means, you should let them control you. Oh, he did it again. Good eye. Look, Roy, all this Chandler binging aside, do me a favor. Don't let her past muck around with you all's future, okay?
She slept with him last night. I mean, are you two officially dating? No.
Have you already slept together?
No.
Coach, you want to bring this home?
Grow up and get over it.
The Diamond Dogs have struck again. What is it about that scene that you see as it relates to discourse and what it might look like in the classroom?
Well, it's interesting a little bit. So Roy in that scene, he hasn't been a part of these discussions, right? So he's somebody new who's been being kind of drawn in. So it's almost like it's partly about him finding out what you can get out of talking about it with other people, right? And so that one is like they already pretty much knew the solution. So it was much more about the discourse helping Roy to realize, I think, what the problem was.
So it's almost more of a supportive. So if we're thinking about it in a classroom, it might be students sharing their own solutions, their own ideas, their own thinking with someone who's trying to develop maybe a greater understanding about a topic.
Right.
So
yeah, and with pre-service teachers today, we were talking about the CGI story types and trying to understand those complicated comparison stories. And we were analyzing a particular one, and as different people shared kind of how they were thinking about it, all of a sudden one teacher says, "Oh, now I know what I didn't understand."
Yeah, so there's an example of this idea of talking our way to understanding. We've talked about in our classrooms, I know, this idea of think alouds, right? Making our thinking visible. And I think that happens a lot in the show. Any good show, right, is that we don't know always what's going on in the heads of the characters. And so sometimes that comes out in the dialogue.
The TLTLLT players perform a scene from Season 1, Episode 6. These aren't my first boots or anything. My mom gave them to me. She was the one who got me into football in the first place. Her and me dad split up when I was just a sexy little baby. She's the reason I work so hard. Just wanted to make her proud. She doesn't even care if I'm any good, just wants to be happy, be a good lad. Once I got good, though, me old man started showing up, didn't he? You know, bragging to all his mates every time I scored a goal, calling me soft if I didn't. Dominate, you know? And I hated that. I actually effing hated that. So I made a vow to be so tough that he could never call me soft again. I wonder if sometimes I forgot about making her proud. I don't think that she would be lately.
We learn a lot about Jamie in terms of he kind of shows up at the end, and up to this point he's been an antagonist, not a villain, right?
Right.
And his thinking out loud, his sharing, puts into perspective a little bit about where he's coming from.
Right.
But it seems like in the conversation with everybody else, though it's more of a soliloquy, he's coming to an observation at the end of it.
Yeah, I think so too. And then, I mean, the sign of good writing on the show is that that's consistent with things we find out much later in the series about his life and his growing up.
About those connections.
Yeah. So, yeah, that element of kind of talking your way to understanding. And then I think it's about sometimes with discourse that as a group, right? I mean, that can have that's a great example of Jamie kind of making that progress. But then as a group, you get something even kind of different, kind of talking our way to understanding as a community.
The TLTL LP players present an adapted scene from Season 2, Episode 1.
Well, fellas, I am more stumped than Paul Bunyan's local forest. Any ideas?
If Danny needs motivation, we could always just show him his paycheck.
I mean, that's a tad aggressive, you know? But hey, I shouldn't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm. So I appreciate you getting the ball rolling, Nate. Yeah? Seems like the first thing we need to do is define the issue, hey?
I think we already know what this is, don't we, Coach?
What you talking about, Willis? Hey, you're not supposed to say that word out loud.
Which is why I wrote it down. But what are the yips? It's when, just out of nowhere, an athlete suddenly can't do the basic fundamentals of their sport.
Ted, what are your thoughts on therapy? General apprehension and a modest Midwestern skepticism? Why do you ask? Well, maybe we should bring in a sports psychologist. I know a lot of other clubs have had tremendous success with that. It's not a bad idea, Coach. Let me think here. Let me get my thinking thing on. Okay. Yeah, let's do it.
Kind of what that brought to mind is an experience just from today. So my pre-service teachers are working with third graders and first graders, and today they were with first grade. And at the end of the lesson, we did a counting circle, number sense routine, where kind of everybody takes a turn counting up by a certain amount. It was a good experience. I was glad my students got to see it. But then when I got back here, the teacher had emailed me that they had a discourse about it afterwards. That conversation among the first graders afterward brought out things that even the mathematical experience itself didn't bring out. And that scene also, I think, has some of that. One of the things the first graders noticed today wasn't always the same people talking.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and you know, somebody else said everybody got a chance to talk. And if you think about how those scenes would typically go in a show, right, the coach talks a lot and then maybe the lead does. But the show really gives time to have everybody have something to say. And by everybody participating, it becomes more significant, I think, for the group as a whole.
So what's interesting in that for me in particular is the way that they're sharing ideas. And Ted actually talks about the importance of allowing ideas to come out without there being judgment.
Don't bring an umbrella to a brainstorm.
Right. And so while Nate's suggestion is a tad bit aggressive, right? He at least got the ball rolling.
Yeah.
They are going back to a previous episode, right? They're smarter together. They're getting smarter together by sharing all of these different ideas and different approaches.
Yeah. And the authenticity of it. I mean, they genuinely think they know what the problem is.
Right.
Right. And they're right, it turns out later on, right?
Right.
But they don't know a response to it. So it is something real that they're discussing.
And they're all bringing different pieces to it.
And in fact, right, this scene is what leads to them bringing in the psychologist,
Right.
where we see a whole bunch more kind of effective discourse.
Right. But let's hear from some folks who are actually doing discourse in their classroom.
Yeah, excellent.
Andrew Otten is a middle school math teacher in Michigan. His brother, Dr. Samuel Otten, is an associate professor of mathematics education at the University of Missouri. Welcome. I can't tell you how excited we are. This is new. Well, I guess everything's new to our podcast, right, John? But this is brand new. We've got 4 of us on the same call, and 2 of those people, as you can see from their names, are brothers, and they're also former Grand Valley students. So why don't we take a moment and introduce yourself, gentlemen? Sam, why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Yeah, I'm Sam Otten. Yeah, I graduated from Grand Valley with these 2 gentlemen as some of my professors in 2006. Then I went to Michigan State University for 6 years of various kinds of graduate school experiences. And then since 2012, so for over a decade now, I've been a math ed professor here at the University of Missouri, and I host the Math Ed podcast, and Dave and John have been guests on that podcast.
I am the Andrew Otten. I also went to Grand Valley. I had Dave as a professor, multiple classes. I don't know if I actually had Mr. Golden as a professor, at least one, I think one class.
Yeah.
But we worked together, making a math competition, and definitely worked together. Went to Grand Valley, graduated, got a job at Northview Public Schools, and I've been teaching there for now 8 years. Been in Grand Rapids since 2010 and love it.
So, Andrew, have you had a chance to watch Ted Lasso?
Negative. I have heard good things about it. The only thing I know, honestly, is that he was a football coach and now a soccer coach. I'm not sure if he got fired or what happened. And honestly, most of my knowledge is about from memes. It comes from stuff I've seen with using his face. And I'm like, okay, that must be a joke that I don't get, but it's funny. So that's all I know.
And that's not a requirement to be either on the podcast or have this conversation. How about you, Sam? Have you had a chance to watch Ted Lasso?
Well, I'm kind of surprised, but yes, I have. I've seen more than the other guest on this episode. But I saw the commercial that it was based on, the NBC Sports commercial. And then I was at a family member's, and that family member had Apple Plus TV. And I knew I wanted to watch it. So I watched 3 or 4 episodes while I was visiting there. And I really enjoyed it. I liked the style of the show, the tone. I thought it was a really cool look at sports and a different angle at sports that's kind of coming at it from a different angle than Friday Night Lights and all the intensity and breaking down some of the masculinity and things that you kind of assume in sports. So I really enjoyed it. I am hoping to watch more of it, but I'm not willing to pay for Apple Plus TV to do so. So I'm waiting to use that free month. If they're still doing that, maybe I can time that just right.
You time it for the start of season 3.
And then try to just catch the whole thing up.
So our theme for this episode is discourse. So in the little bit that you've seen, Sam, where did you see discourse in those episodes that you had a chance to watch?
Yeah, I can definitely see discourse as a theme in the show because it comes up in a few different ways. Like I mentioned, the sort of different approach to coaching. A lot of times there might be this assumption that coaching is about strategy and it's about really knowing the game. And it's also about sort of the physicality and the workouts and all that stuff. But to me, from what I saw of Ted Lasso, he really views the personal relationships as an important part of coaching. And he sort of is attuned to how people are feeling. And he realizes, we might need to connect and we might need to talk through something to work this out. And it seems to me like that might become, you can fill in more, but it might become more a big part of the show where the talking is actually part of the coaching. And it's not just talking through the rules of soccer and the rules of, football in international football, but it's also talking to build the relationships and that we need to have these relationships and this trust. And we need to understand each other if we're going to be an effective unit, if we're going to, be an effective group. That to me seems like kind of taking the discourse and making it central to coaching, not just what's on the field or on the pitch.
So in terms of building relationship, one of the things that Ted does is he asks lots of questions, right? And he tries to get to know the people that he works with. So we try to do the same thing of our guests. Our first question, it's not necessarily one that he asked, but it's certainly one that comes up a lot in the show, is coffee or tea? So Sam, are you a coffee drinker or a tea drinker?
I would have to go with tea. When I went to college, I was afraid that I might become a coffee drinker, and I just see a lot of the world is addicted to this drug that is infused in their drink. And I managed to make it all the way through Grand Valley without ever starting to drink coffee. And since I've made it through that college experience, I figured I can just make it as long as I want. So I still have not become a coffee drinker, but tea is interesting, different flavors, different parts of the world. So I would have to go with the tea side of things.
All righty. How about you, Andrew? Coffee or tea?
Yes, I'm definitely in the similar boat. I don't really drink either. If I had to pick one, I almost always would pick coffee between the two. I just don't have tea around the house, or none of my, generally is not available. So if I ever pick one, I would do coffee just because it's there, or it's on the way. But I almost never drink either one very often. Usually water is my go-to. But
Okay, well, Andrew, maybe we should ask you, and then flat water or sparkling water.
Ooh, I actually like flat water way better. I don't know why. I actually love it way better. Yeah.
So, Andrew, maybe you could tell us kind of what does the discourse look like in your classroom?
So I have about 2 years ago changed my room to be in pods of 4 instead of facing the front board, trying to cause more like natural discourse. And I start almost every day with some type of discourse about not math, just to like get them started talking. Because I feel like if it's about math, about half the kids are already going to be checked out. So every Monday or Wednesday or Friday, it's usually something about like either favorite ice cream or what did you watch last night or what movie did you watch over the weekend. It's usually very easy to make it approachable. So that's kind of what I started doing a couple of years ago. And they're all facing each other. The biggest thing is having them face each other instead of me. So they feel like they naturally have to talk to them, because you're looking right at them. It's almost awkward not to say something, at least hello or something like that. So I think the desk is the biggest thing that I have in my room that is a purposeful positioning for discourse, and then getting them to talk about something not math related at first.
All right. And Sam, so Andrew talked about his teaching context, and you mentioned Mizzou, but do you want to describe kind of who's in your classroom, and then what does discourse look like there?
Yeah, I teach year to year. I teach undergraduates, but also master's teachers and also some doctoral students. And then my research is actually still in middle and high schools. So that's where I do my traveling every few weeks out in some sort of school. But whether I'm teaching it or whether I'm kind of looking for it in the classroom, what I'm really looking for is kind of this attitude where the pace is a little bit of a slower pace to allow kind of, Andrew was talking about making the space conducive to conversation and giving room for that to come out. I think also the pace needs to be conducive for conversation to come out, where we're not rushing through something that's pre-planned. We actually have these moments where we want to just let things bubble up from the room. We want to actually pause and hear what other people's perspectives on it. And I feel like if the pace is too quick, students get the message that like, nope, we should kind of just button down, quiet up and let it sort of flow through. So I look for that pace where like, does this pace seem to let the discourse happen? And maybe that's what Andrew is doing with that first move of saying like, hey, I actually want you to talk. We're actually going to make time, and this is intentional, that your voices should come in. So it's also sending a pace cue. So I look for that. I also look for the teacher having this mindset of being interested in like what the students actually might say. So it's asking a question that might have interesting answers, or they might have different answers. And also the teacher with body language or with, reactions or whatever it might be, the teacher to me kind of sets that tone of, I'm legitimately interested in what you might say and what you might say and what you might say in response to that. And so the pace and that sort of body language are to me like these signals. And then it's not like the discourse is great all the time, but I feel like if you have those things, it's around the corner. Right around the corner, there's going to be some interesting ideas that come up or an interesting discussion that kind of comes up.
Yeah. So those are interesting things that kind of contribute, things you're doing to set the conditions for discourse. Andrew, as you then move from some of these non-mathematical conversations, are there any things you do to start mathematical discourse?
Yeah, I mean, you want to keep it very open entry points, I guess would be the term I'd use. Like post a question that there's almost no wrong answer to. Sometimes I'll even whisper to the kid who always pops their hand up. There's always one of those in every class who always is willing to share. Sometimes I even tell them as they come in, like, hey, why don't you just take today off and like just listen? You almost have to do that intentionally because they're going to always be wanting to share, which is fine. I've done that a few times, but just giving them something that there's no way that's the wrong answer. And you almost right away get people sharing, even if it's just something minor. So I'm trying to think of an example, but like I've done Notice and Wonders. I don't know if you guys heard it, but just like you put a picture up and it's going to relate somehow to the lesson, but it literally is just a picture and you say, all right, what do you notice? What do you wonder? and you force people to talk. You basically say, there's no way you can't answer that question. They're just super simple to at least try.
So in a situation like that, where you pose a notice and wonder, are they talking whole class, or are they talking to each other first and then to you?
Yeah, within their tables. So, and I don't even actively say that anymore. It's more of just they naturally have this table that they start talking to. And then it depends. Sometimes I pick people at random where I say, all right, your table's got to share something. What did your table talk about? And one thing I love is that I'll point at a table. I won't point at a person. So I'll say, okay, this table, what did you talk about? And if they don't want to, what did your table talk about? So it's very much not their answer. It's our answer. So it kind of keeps it from being personal.
So Sam, you wrote an article with some colleagues about teacher discourse moves, supporting productive and powerful discourse. What are you hearing in what Andrew's talking about that you might point to that others of us could try? And are there other things that we ought to consider as we're trying to promote discourse and teachers promote discourse in their classroom?
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I worked for several years at Michigan State with a group of various universities, but Beth Herbel-Eisenman, Michelle Cirillo, Mike Steele, and then a team of us. We were working on discourse moves that teachers could use in middle school and high school. And Andrew's kind of connecting to some of them, but we were inspired by Project Challenge, which is like Chapin and O'Connor from the Boston area, because they worked with elementary teachers and they tried to just work in their math lessons at the elementary level. And they tried to give the teachers some tools to get more math talk happening. And this was in one of the, under-resourced kind of low SES schools in the Boston area. And then they were very pleasantly surprised to find that the math scores really rose based on, they attributed it to this math talk PD that was kind of district wide. Their math scores really jumped up. And it was impressive. But what also surprised them was like their English language arts scores and literacy scores also went up. And that wasn't even part of the PD. That was just like a happy sort of accident. So we were inspired by that, and we tried to work in the secondary level about how we can get some of those same discourse moves happening. And so this project, we talked about some of the things Andrew's saying, where you can have students talk to each other and then share out. You can also kind of cue them that you're going to be doing this to like let them know, I want to hear from you, or you can share out. It doesn't have to be you individually, but you're from your group. And then in that project, we also talked about other moves like asking students to revoice one another. So if a student brings out an interesting idea, just throw it to another part of the room and say, can you kind of revoice what you heard or respond to it? Teacher can also revoice. We had moves like explicitly asking students to connect ideas. So if you start having ideas come out, take a little moment to maybe put them on the board and then ask for further discourse, where now I want you to talk about what's the connection between these ideas that have been coming out. So it's almost like a little bit of a meta level discourse. Once you start to get some things shared, then there's a lot of things as a teacher you can play off of that, or you can do moves off of those. It's also kind of fun. And usually the teachers, once they start to get that discourse happening, they start to get students sharing ideas and then responding to each other's ideas. Teachers often report that they have more fun on those days, or they feel more energized when that happens, versus like if they had to do all the work and all the talking and they kind of feel depleted by the end of the day,
Verify that as a teacher, that Sam just said, is way more, I think, more fun when they're actually involved. It's way more fun. Sometimes it's tough to get them going, but if you can, it's a ton of fun. Flies by. Yeah.
Does that connect to Ted Lasso? You Ted Lasso fans?
One of the examples we gave in an earlier episode was where end of season 1, where they don't feel like they have a chance of winning, right? And the owner, Rebecca, reminds Ted that sort of his superpower is that he doesn't know anything, right? So he can come to the match surprising them with new, different approaches. They'll do what's unexpected, but he doesn't necessarily then come out and tell the players what to do. He asks them, what should we do, right? And again, it's fair to say that in that moment, there's lots of energy in the room as the players are sharing the different trick plays. What are they called? Elaborate set pieces? Is that it? Elaborate set pieces. They're much more it's a much different sort of feel, right? And so I appreciate both you bringing it up. And I think John and I would say the same thing in my own classroom, right? There's a whole lot more energy when students are talking than when I'm talking. So Andrew, let's start with you. What do you see students doing during discourse?
So while they're discourse, I'd say, yeah, I mean, leaning in, definitely. Ideally, they're not even thinking about putting a hand up. They're just basically, if they think of something, they share, they feel open to share. If you can get it right, the other kids, if you share something, they're not going to make fun of it. They're at least going to listen to it and be like, I disagree for this reason. It's not like a teasing situation. That's the start of the year. That's usually what it is students kind of are like, that's a dumb answer. And then later on, they start getting better about just listening. So yeah, definitely leaning in. Interrupting each other is going to happen naturally. So actually, I'm okay with that as long as it's done respectfully. Obviously, like realize it and apologize and let them finish. But then it's good that you're interrupting because you want to share so much. So I'd say interruptions and leaning in are probably the most common things that I look for that I'm actually happy with. Yeah, hopefully on topic. But even if it's a little bit off topic, I'm usually okay with that too.
Sam, what about you? What are you seeing either in your own classroom or in teachers' classrooms? Again, I'm going to bring up a article you wrote about students actively listening, a foundation for productive discourse in mathematics classroom that we'll link to in our show notes, but that might provide some framework for this part of the discussion.
I would hope to see the students listening to each other. So they're actually tuning in because they're curious what their peers are saying. But also, a lot of times they have something they want to say. So if you really get the discourse going, then there's usually more ideas than can even come out onto the floor. That's why you might have interruptions and stuff like that. So one thing that I see, and this also goes for college classes when the discourse is really happening, is that people have ideas that they want to share and they maybe don't fit it into the live discussion, but they email it after class, or they bring it up the next week or the next class period. They say, hey, this was still on my mind. So to me, what I kind of see if the discourse is really happening is you sort of see that it takes a life even beyond the bell, like even later that night or the next day, it's still on their mind. And probably there's good lectures, that do that as well. Like somebody's still thinking about it that night or the next day. But I feel like when it's discussions, it's more likely that it actually is still alive for the person and still like staying with them even after the class, because it was something that they were in that was kind of more dynamic because it had multiple voices like in the discussion.
What are some of the barriers that you see kind of that inhibit students from entering into discourse? Let's start with Andrew, maybe.
One is just feeling unsafe in the classroom. Like that's by far the biggest. And I teach in middle school, so they're always worried about what's going to be remembered or whatever, saying something dumb. So that's a big part of it. That's probably for me, that's probably the biggest.
Andrew, I know that it's come up in a lot of the other discussions we have when we talk about hurdles. Time seems to be one that comes up a lot. How do you make time for discourse?
Yes. So about 2 years ago, we kind of redid we call them priority standards at our district. So instead of having like all this curriculum we have to get through each day, we basically have of this unit for the next 4 weeks, we have 3 like main targets that we have to get covered. So really, it cuts down on that completely. I can easily cut out a lesson if it's not a main target without feeling particularly guilty about it or anything like that. So to me, the time, I pretty much have like a 1 target per week that I focus on. So if something goes out for a day, we kind of do a little bit extra discussion for half an hour. That doesn't bother me at all anymore. But I think having that type of planning in your head is a different way that most teachers probably don't usually do it. But just having an idea of like, here's my main focus. It's not about covering this material each day. It's more about this target that I'm trying to cover, whatever it might be. And it's usually a very broad target. So it'll take maybe 2 to 3 days to cover it well, but it's not like it's set in stone what's going on each day. Yeah.
Sam, what about you? What do teachers tell you are the barriers for productive discourse?
Yeah, one of them is the time that you already kind of talked about. I really like the idea that Andrew's saying about the priority standards and really kind of simplifying that. I feel like that would help a lot for a lot of teachers. One of it is a comfort level that they'll talk about. Like some teachers will just very honestly kind of share that they're not confident in being able to orchestrate all the dynamics that might happen. And that's true. I mean, it's very kind of challenging and tough to do. And I try it, but it doesn't mean I'm always good at it. So that could just be this thing of a confidence level of a teacher being very confident if they sort of can lead the way and then show how to think about it and how to complete it and give nice explanations. And that might be within a strong comfort zone for the teacher. Whereas opening it up and like Andrew was saying, trying to really keep it pretty open, they might not have that same confidence level of, well, what's going to come at me and will I be able to tie it together and where I wanted it to go, or will it feel kind of stilted or something? That would be another one. And then I think curriculum materials, like some curriculum materials will have each lesson, you can kind of see like, ooh, that would be a good discussion topic. Like we could talk about that, get some different answers out, debate it. And then other curriculum materials might be like, nope, it's all written. It's all straightforward. That's what you do. That's the next thing you do. Here's some exercises. And so that's a pretty big burden for a teacher. If your curriculum material is basically laid out straightforwardly, not really in a debate centered way, that's a big ask to sort of say, no, each day or each week, you have to somehow find this big debate moment or this big discussion moment and bring it to life. Like you're almost kind of asking them to be a curriculum designer and the implementer and do everything else that they're busy with all day, all at the same time. And then you also have the student resistance. Like some students might be like, I'm not going to do all that thinking. That sounds hard. Can't you just tell me, like, tell me what you want? And sometimes maybe you do tell them a little bit, but you try to find some understanding as a community. Like in this community, we do want moments where the students are going to share their ideas or their questions and debate some things back and forth.
Andrew, is there, kind of building off that, is there anything that you feel like built your confidence? Feel free to say Grand Valley if you want, but you don't have to. Was there anything that, but seriously, was there anything that you felt like built your confidence to be able to lean into this idea of discourse?
Yeah, I will mention my my awesome master's degree program at Mizzou was very helpful. So thank you for any of my professors that did that. Yeah, you're talking about like just generally like resources or train, like things that have helped me out. You're saying, yeah, I would say part of it is just like you don't have to have a amazing example to get kids to talk. You have to find online. Like I've come into a class and I'm just like, all right, how long do you guys think it is from Lake Michigan to Lake Huron? Like that's it. Like you don't have to have like a picture. It can just be a question that kids can somewhat, okay, it took me this many hours to drive from here to here. They can do some basic loose math to kind of get a guess. So like whatever it is, I just get them talking and give them a question that they can't, Google super easily, like stuff like that is what I've done before. So I always just feel like it doesn't have to be a big thing, just something to get them talking.
Sam, I'm wondering, can you say, we've been kind of saying productive discourse without really being clear. So is there some quality that makes discourse productive or something you look for that?
Yeah. I would say getting the kids talking, that is productive in the sense of setting a tone for the class and just valuing their voice. So even if it's something where it was like, as a group, we really got into this debate, and even if there wasn't a clear math point to it, there still might have been a group point to it, or there might have been a dynamic, like we're setting a dynamic and a relationship with each other. So that's still worthwhile. But then at some point along the way, you would also hope to have some mathematically like oriented discussions. The thing that our group looked for at the Mdisk group, the Beth Herbleisman, Cirillo, and Steele, was we looked for some sort of mathematical objective that even if you didn't achieve it, you at least were having some ideas that were brought out around that mathematical objective. Maybe you've kind of walked around the objective 3 different ways and you didn't quite get there. That's okay, but that's still productive if there is something you were circling, like there was something that you were starting to approach, and then maybe you'll be able to get there next. But if nobody on our team or the teacher themselves, if they couldn't really identify a mathematical point or a mathematical objective that was within the conversation, then we did view that as somewhat of a problem, because it's like, if we can't tell and if the teacher can't really tell what this is oriented towards mathematically, then the students also probably are not sure what they're supposed to get out of it. Like what are they supposed to remember or take hold of like afterward? As long as there's kind of this topic that you never get too strayed away from. Not that straying is bad, because straying might just mean you're backing up to come at it from another angle. So that's okay. But, it's hard to sort of describe in the abstract, but when we're seeing the discourse happen, as long as we could identify some mathematical target that is never too far out of reach or too far out of focus, and we felt, pretty good about it.
Is it fair to say that you're just looking for progress to be being made in terms of understanding?
Yeah, even if you're just talking through and better understanding the wrong way to do it, that still serves a mathematical purpose, because it's like, yes, we understand through conversation, we understand why that was the wrong way to do it. And so even though it didn't get to a quote unquote like answer, that still would have been productive because we gained that understanding. And then it might be like, oh, we talked it through, we provided reasoning, we kind of debated it, and we did arrive at an answer that we justified. Then hopefully that conversation also led to like more understanding of that thing. So yeah, it's messy and there's lots of dynamics, and that's part of what happens when you have a discourse rich classroom, is it gets a little bit messy. But a lot of times that mess is a good kind of mess. And hopefully it's including more students' voices that would otherwise be kind of marginalized if it was not discourse rich.
Yeah, to me, I would even say one thing I love about productive discourse is those students who, even if they just say parallel lines like one time, I already feel like it was kind of productive, because that student may during a lecture would have spent like half asleep or not even, you know what I mean? So even to me, even productive is just them using some of the vocab themselves, or even just grappling with what does that word even mean? Because I've only seen it written and talked about. I've never said it or thought about it myself. So to me, even if it doesn't relate to the thing, that to me is at least somewhat productive. Obviously not your main goal, but it's productive in the way of the students are doing some math in their mind. Yeah.
That's nice in terms of, so that it involves a particular participation piece. So Andrew brought up the idea of notice and wonder as one, maybe a resource, as he was talking about the distance from Lake Michigan to Lake Huron. That makes me think about some of the estimation 180 as a resource. Sam, are there other resources that you think of when it comes that can support teachers with discourse?
Well, I will plug Mdisk again with Beth Herbal-Eisman. She's kind of the centerpiece of it. And we have some articles, we have some resources. We also have some materials that we're pretty happy to share. Having a problem that does have the open-endedness, like Andrew talked about at the beginning, Open Middle has grabbing some open-ended problems or open middle problems. 3-act tasks usually are rich enough that you can kind of talk about actually the first act, the second act, and the third act. You can kind of have discourse all along the way. Number talks is, one that has really kind of taken off, and having a kind of structure for how we can talk about math ideas and make connections across problems. And I know that's been broadened out to math talks, not just number talks. Those are a few things, but I agree actually with Andrew that it doesn't always take a lot of something really big and fancy to get the discourse happening. To me, it's more of that pace, that space, and that mindset of showing the interest. And then all of a sudden you can be surprised with, oh, wow, that did become a nice little discussion there. You don't have to wait to have the perfect resource to just try to hear from your students more and then try to build on that once they do start sharing.
I'll say one more resource I don't think that we said is Which One Doesn't Belong. If you've seen that, it's kind of, I'm sure people have heard it. It's really good just for discussion. Always more than one correct answer, which I love. There's like an infinite if you think about it creatively enough. And I always accept every answer as long as you have a reason, even if it's really kind of creative or something. So that's a good one too.
We want to thank Andrew and Sam for the time that they gave us. We appreciate their commitment to math education and their willingness to share their experiences and research with the Teaching Like Ted Lasso community.
That's so wonderful.
It's wonderful. Yeah, that was good. It was good to reconnect with Sam and with Andrew, but it also is just so affirming that your former students are doing things that are teaching you.
Oh,
right?
100%.
Yeah. And walking away from that thinking about, again, how much this experience, which is discourse, right, has affected my practice.
Right. Like I was saying just before the Ottens thing about it's kind of all the connections that are coming out. And to some extent, right, it's a little artificial doing it for the camera and sharing it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is how you and I talk about teaching, right? So it's really authentic in terms of that.
And both Sam and Andrew talked about this idea of this being energizing, right? And for me, that's also part of the difference between what my experience and lots of other things is and these sorts of things. I walk away from our exchanges and exchanges with others where we're engaging in this sort of discourse, feeling energized.
Mm-hmm. Or that just even teaching, right? That when you're teaching a class and you're the one who's having to pour everything in, versus when one of these conversations gets started, you are exhausted if it's you providing all the prompts.
Right.
But when the conversation gets going, I leave the class just buzzing.
Right. Because not only am I not expending the energy, but I'm gaining energy from the conversations and the work. And like I said, I walk away buzzing. So how can our audience be a part of this discussion? And I'm asking you because you're on the steering committee, correct, for Math in Action?
Right. So we have a local conference coming up February 25th, and we'll be doing a live episode of Teaching Like Ted Lasso. So you can be in the audience there. It's also going to be hybrid. So It's a partially hybrid conference, and there's an option for remote participation. There will be a couple sections every offering that you have a choice of to zoom into. So that would be one way you could see it. And then we'll probably have the recording on our media outlets, depending on how things go.
Fingers crossed, right? We can't promise anything,
but also, as Sam and Andrew showed, you do not have to be fans of the show.
No, yeah.
Right? Because we want to talk to you about teaching.
Right.
So when you have connections to the theme we're talking about, we really want to hear about it. And if you have ideas for themes, we'd be glad to hear it.
Yeah. We're imagining, so this is our 5th episode, and we're planning on 10. So we're halfway. So we figured that, to John's earlier point, that this could be a retrospective that looked at the connections between these. So how does play and be curious and teamwork and vulnerability and discourse, how do those all fit together in the show? But as John said, even if you're not a fan of the show, how does it look in your classroom? We're looking for your ideas. We're looking to share what we've already talked about in the episodes. So be a part of that. If you have any questions about that, you can reach out to us on social media. Information will also be in the show notes. It's a great conference with some really great presenters as well.
Yeah, it's very practice centered.
Yeah.
Right. So it's not people lecturing at you. It's really a chance where people, I think, are sharing authentically what they're doing.
Yeah, what they're trying.
Yeah.
Awesome. So good. Hope to see you there. If not, that's okay too. We know you're busy people.
Guys, I have something I need to talk about. Rhombus Rovers, assemble.
Oh.